21. Try that again, since we're recording. So thank you all for being here. This is the February 2021 meeting of the Executive Committee of A Home for Everyone. We will begin with introductions. Then we will welcome a new Executive Committee member, Cindy Adams. We'll take the vote of appointment. Then we'll have a brief presentation on a new slate of Home for Everyone Equity Committee members and request your vote to approve them. Then we will do a brief update on the most recent severe weather response that we just came out of. Celeste Duval from the Joint Office is here to assist with that. Then we'll spend some time updating on the Metro measure, the local implementation plan, and our progress towards implementation. Then we had a request from Executive Committee members to talk a little bit about data and some of the questions around our by name list at the point in time count. And as we were developing that, we also spent some time with a group called Community Solutions that have an initiative called Built for Zero. We asked them to come today and speak to us a little bit about their work with an eye toward partnering with them going forward. Then if there's time, I'm going to just provide a brief update on the request for programmatic qualifications, the RFPQ that is out for alternative shelter. And if we have time, then we will take updates from Executive Committee members. So any questions or concerns about the agenda? All right, Paul, if you could take it down, that would be great. We'll go ahead and do introductions, and I will just call on you to keep that process moving. Councilor Palmero.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mario Palmero, and I am one of the Gresham City Councilmen. I will be representing the City of Gresham. Just want to say thank you to everyone here and for all their work in helping City of Gresham meet the needs of our citizens. I want to thank Multnomah County Chair Kafori and our Representative Lori Stegman, Commissioner Stegman, and Mayor Ted Wheeler, and all of you guys who on this board have done tremendous work to help us here in East County. Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you, Councilor. Thank you for being here. Commissioner Ryan.
Yes, good afternoon. Grateful to be here and look forward to having a great meeting.
Michael Bonacore.
Hi everyone, Michael Bonacore with Home Forward. I use he, him pronouns. Nice to see you all.
Stacy.
Hi, Stacy. I'm the co-chair of the coordinating board and I use she and her pronouns. Nice to see you all.
Thanks for being here, Stacy. Vanessa.
Hi, Vanessa Sturgeon. Nice to see you all. Looking forward to today's meeting.
And Commissioner Myron.
Greetings, Sharon Myron, Multnomah County Commissioner for District 1.
Welcome, Mayor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ted Wheeler, Portland Mayor, and Councilor Palmero, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
And Chair.
Deborah Kafori, Multnomah County Chair. I use she, her pronouns. Good to see you all.
All right, there are a number of Joint Office staff on this call who will get to introduce themselves as they come up on the agenda. So we will do that at that time. But right now, I wanted to welcome Cindy Adams to the Executive Committee. Cindy, I'll give you a chance to share a little bit. We sent a bio around to Executive Committee members. I think you all know Cindy at this point. Cindy, appreciate that you've been visiting not just the Executive Committee, but also the coordinating board meetings to kind of orient yourself to this work. Really excited that you're coming to this work from experience in the United Way in Hawaii, where you actually oversaw parts of the homeless response system, I think including coordinated access. So it's wonderful that you're bringing this this experience to our community. I think also particularly excited that the United Way here has a regional footprint that includes Washington, Clackamas counties as well as Multnomah and Clark, I think. and that you're coming to us at a time when we are moving towards a more regional response. So I'm really grateful for your interest in joining and filling the seat of philanthropy on the executive committee. So thank you for being here. I'll turn it over to you in case there's anything you'd like to share.
Thank you. First of all, it's an honor to be a part of this team and the executive committee. This is work that I do care a lot about, and happy to see that that our United Way here in Portland is starting to engage in this work as well. So I do very much appreciate the opportunity to participate in this way. Hopefully some of my learnings in Hawaii can be shared as well. I am also very much open to learning, and have been over the last, I would say, 12 months, learning more about what this looks like in Portland and how we might be able to help. So thank you very much.
So any discussion or comments from the executive committee before we take a vote and officially?
Mark, I'd like to say something if I could. First of all, Cindy, thank you for being here today, and thanks for expressing an interest. I am excited to have you join. We need you. You have public sector experience, you have private sector experience, and as Mark just pointed out, the work you did in Hawaii is directly relevant to a lot of the challenges we're facing here. I'm particularly interested in your background and experience with the Hawaii Meth Project. As I'm sure you're keenly aware, this is a growing issue in our community as well. And I think it would be great to have somebody to team up with who has over a decade of experience in that area. I think there's a lot you can bring to our table here. So I just want to give you a shout out and a word of thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry that you all can't see my face. I have a big smile on my face. As I shared in chat, I'm calling in through our VPN, and so it's very limited. And I am happy to, at any time, have a conversation with anybody about crystal meth.
Thank you.
All right. If there are no further comments at this point, then I'll invite a motion to appoint Cindy to the executive committee.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. Thank you all very much. Cindy, welcome to the executive committee. Again, a lot of appreciation that you're stepping into this role. So thank you. We look forward to working with you even more closely. All right. I think the next item on the agenda,
Thank you.
Paul, if I'm correct, Paul, the next item is the appointment of new equity committee members. Is that correct? All right. I'm going to turn it over to Joshua Bates, our equity manager.
Hello, everyone. I am Joshua Bates. I'm the equity manager at the Joint Office of Homeless Services. I use he, him, and his pronouns, and I will be discussing the equity committee recruitment. So before diving into the specific candidates that we are bringing before you today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the equity committee and its role moving forward. Paul, can we go to the next slide, please? So the Home for Everyone Equity Committee, Executive Committee formed an equity committee in 2018 to ensure that a Home for Everyone incorporates racial equity in programs and policies. This committee's only been around for about 2 years or 2.5 years now, and we've actually never gone through a formal recruitment process until this one. The committee's goal is to eliminate racial disparities in homelessness and housing supports by integrating racial equity across a Home for Everyone to ensure equitable programmatic and policy outcomes. So it's really a repository of expertise to impact all Home for Everyone's form and functions in regards to equity. The committee is a chartered committee of the coordinating board within the Home for Everyone governance structure and offers guidance to the coordinating board, executive committee, and Joint Office of Homeless Services. So it's one of the only chartered committees in the Home for Everyone governance structure, and its explicit purpose is equity. Can we go to the next slide, please, Paul? So The committee's purpose is to lead key work areas to advance racial equity in a home for everyone, such as equity, accountability, and performance measures, and training recommendations for home for everyone participants in their communities. Some of the things the Equity Committee has done in the past is provide recommendations on how to better center equity across the entire structure, has facilitated or identified and organized trainings for the coordinating board, and has also advised on the recruitment of coordinating board members. Another purpose of the Equity Committee is to identify structures and connections within a home for everyone to advance racial equity. This purpose is really crucial right now because, as many of you know, right now we're facilitating the strategic planning process for our initiative to end homelessness here in our community. In this process, the Equity Committee will serve as the equity advisory body for the strategic planning process to ensure that the next iteration of our initiative to end homelessness is rooted in racial equity. That means that all the different forms and functions across our initiative to end homelessness will have an equity focus and have an equity lens deployed to identify those structures. And finally, the Equity Committee's purpose is to create and maintain committee member relationships that further racial equity work and demonstrate how equitable collaborative decision-making occurs by building a committee culture that shares power and is trauma-informed. Okay, with all of that being said, as this is the first time that we've actually facilitated a recruitment for the Equity Committee. The core values of that recruitment was expertise in equity and lived experience of both homelessness and also of culturally specific lived experience. We in this process, both a coordinating board member, myself, and a equity committee member all facilitated these interviews, and these interviews were really just to identify the ideal new composition to shepherd this committee forward. So with that all being said, these are the new members. Can we go to the next slide, please? The new members of the coordinating board of the Equity Committee are James Craig of Health Share of Oregon, Kim James, who is a coordinating board member of Cascadia Behavioral Health, Marisa Espinoza, who's also a coordinating board member of Northwest Pilot Project, Miguel Tellez from Northwest Instituto Latino, Octavia Chambers, who is a community-based equity champion, Rosa Quinones from the Gresham Stand-Up Movement, and Stephen Rakerd of Rakerd and Associates. And really, this group of folks identified were vastly different in their approaches to equity, but each and every one of them had a different quality that the Equity Committee member, along with the coordinating board member and myself, thought would be hugely beneficial to both the Equity Committee and our initiative more broadly. So with that, those are all of the new members that we have identified. And with your approval, they will be the new Equity Committee members going forward. All right, Mark, can I pass it back over to you to facilitate the vote? I know I only have 5 minutes, so I was trying to make sure.
We move quickly. Michael's got a question.
Oh,
Michael.
okay, go ahead. Michael, please feel free.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Josh, you may have said this. These are 7 new members. Are they joining a body of existing members, or is it a completely new composition of?
Yes. So they're joining a body of existing members. We have about 8 folks currently on the Equity Committee. That includes Art Rios, Emily Nelson, Michael Thurman Noche, Rebecca Nichols, Beth Burns, Ian Slingerland, and Edith Malina. So that's the current composition. So with these new folks, we'll have about 15 members. And we really think that all 15 members represent a wide range of equity expertise that will be really crucial to both the committee and the strategic planning process. My apologies for not clarifying and identifying those members in the slides. Any other questions?
If there aren't other questions, could I have a motion to appoint the slate of candidates?
So moved.
Get a second?
Second.
Any additional discussion? All right, all in favor of appointing the slate?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
All right, I think it carries. So we have a new slate. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Paul, and everybody who worked so hard to go through this recruitment process. I'm excited about the new membership of the Equity Committee. It's got a really critical charge in all of this work and has a lot of work to do. So it'll be good to have some new folks there. That's fantastic. All right, Paul, what do we have next?
Next up is our severe weather response update with Celeste and yourself.
All right, I will kick us off. So I'm getting some feedback. There we go. So everyone's aware that we just came through a really dramatic period of severe weather, really bitter cold, snow and ice. It had a lot of adverse impacts across our community, and it was particularly challenging for people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. For months, understanding that our severe weather response in the context of COVID-19 was going to need to look very different than it has in past years. We've been planning in partnership with our Emergency Operations Center in the county, emergency operations folks at the city, our health department, and others, many of our community partners who every year come around the table to do planning for severe weather. We did everything in our power to be ready for an event like this. We certainly all hoped we wouldn't have one, but we knew that we needed to be prepared. And the event came. And so, we were only just out of it. We've got some debriefing still to do with all of our partners who were part of the response. But I can say that the strategies that we identified through our planning, the work that we did, allowed us to open severe weather space throughout the community, to honor the commitment that we've always tried to honor, which is not to turn anyone away who sought shelter. We had an unprecedented level of outreach that Celeste will talk about. We were able to provide testing to everybody who came to the Oregon Convention Center, thanks to the work of the health department. Across the board, the community and these planning efforts on the government side and the nonprofit side and from volunteers really allowed us to care for as many people as we possibly could, to reach them with the gear they needed, with the transportation assistance, even when TriMet shut down. So it was a difficult period for folks outside. There's no question about it. And people rallied, and our partners throughout the community on the government side and nonprofit side really stepped up. So I asked Celeste if she could kind of present a little bit of the data related to the efforts that were made over the last week. So I'm going to turn it over to her to do that. Welcome, Celeste.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Celeste Duvall. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Unsheltered Emergency Program Specialist for the Joint Office of Homeless Services. Thank you for allowing me to present today. So our severe weather response this year, as Mark said, was totally different than any other that we've ever done due to the COVID-19 pandemic that is at hand. And between ourselves and the Multnomah County and everybody else that came together, I believe our response was very well done. Could I have the first slide, please? So we began planning way in advance, knowing that this was a La Nina year, and past history shows us that in La Nina years here in the Northwest, we always have a lot of rain the first couple of months, but then we can always pretty much expect a pretty severe snow event somewhere mid-January. It happens almost every year. So in preparation for this severe weather event, the Joint Office began purchasing large supplies of inclement weather gear early last fall and began distribution to our contracted outreach providers, severe weather shelters, voluntary isolation motels, and our other distribution sites that we set up around the county. On this severe weather event between February 8th and February 15th, when we declared we had declared 2 days of cold weather on the 8th and 9th. We had 1 day of pause, probably the pause before the storm, and then we had 5 days of severe weather. During that time, we provided 93 different groups with supplies through our supply center. At this moment, I'm gonna give a huge shout out to Destiny Sanchez. They operate the supply center for us. They handle all the appointments, make sure everybody gets what they need, and tracks all of these numbers for us. So a huge shout out to Destiny. We had 20 contracted providers, 54 mutual aid and volunteer groups, and 19 non-contracted agencies. To the right of your screen, you can see some of the numbers of the items that we distributed during this time. So 1 week prior to the storm, we contacted outreach and had them gear up and start handing out gear to everybody out throughout the county. So as you can see, thousands of pieces of equipment, 4,800 tarps, 2,800 sleeping bags, you know, over 5,000 socks, everything that we could possibly purchase to keep people warm and safe, we got and distributed. After the severe weather event was over, we continued to distribute this gear because we know how much snow we got, and ice destroyed a lot of people's property. Them having clean and dry and protective layers again was very essential for their continued well-being. So during severe weather, part of our strategy is that we increased our full-time outreach staff from 2 to 10 through our contracted providers at Join, Cascadia Behavioral Health, NARA, and Transition Projects. Excuse me. We gained 3 full-time employees for outreach staff that were dedicated to our family outreach. And just a side note, we also placed 2 16 by 8 foot storage pods at the Sunrise Center and outfitted that location with over 300 severe weather gear kits in preparation to support the East County. Next slide, please. So, as I said before, 5 days prior to the first cold weather activation, we'd got outreach and mutual aid groups out into the community distributing all of this gear and getting information to the folks living outside where the new shelters would be at and give them access to bus passes to get to shelter once they opened. So winter and severe weather shelter capacity. During this winter, we've had a capacity of 275 seasonal winter beds that were pretty much filled each day. And once we expanded, we had a total of 414 total severe weather beds available to the folks that we had coming in. On February 11th, for severe weather, it started out slow. We had 47 people with a max capacity of 334 people. 0 families went into motels that night. On the 12th, it increased to 127 with the same capacity. We did motel 3 families that night. February 13th, it almost doubled to 330. As you can see, we were starting to get really close to our max capacity, and 2 families were placed into motels. At that time, the Joint Office and Multnomah County and Transition Projects worked together to expand our bed space. So at the Oregon Convention Center, they expanded by 30 beds. And at the garage, we expanded another, I think it was like 70 beds or more, but there was room to go even larger if we needed to. We opened up the 3rd floor of the garage. February 14th, we had 387 people that came in to seek shelter and 4 families in motels. And then on February 15th, we had 389 people seek shelter in our 3 shelters. Excuse me. What is not noted here is that at the Sunrise Center, when we partnered with the Rockwood CDC with Brad Ketch and Lynn, his wife. They allowed us to use the Sunrise Center as a warming center. We had Cultivate Initiative out there 24/7. And they were doing everything from providing outreach gear. They were doing outreach out in Gresham. They staffed that site for folks that wanted to come in, get a ticket to get downtown. When TriMet quit running, they actually started transporting people themselves. So speaking of transportation, there was over 300 transportations to shelter during this event. And that is a very unique thing to say because TriMet was down. We had everyone from the fire department with their warthogs, Cascadia Behavioral Health out with their vans, private citizens that came in, you know, offering services to help transport people, and even our leader, Mark, out with his, picking up people and getting them into a safe space in the shelter. We partnered with 4 motels during this season, which is something new for our outreach teams to refer folks into motels if they were unable or resistant to going into shelter. After this event, we had partnered with the University Place Hotel, and they opened up 27 rooms for us for folks that were deemed with ambulatory issues that we were concerned wouldn't be able to make it out through the snow mounds that were still on the ground when people exited the shelters. And so I also want to a big shout out to Cascadia Behavioral Health there, because they helped support those folks in that hotel while they were there. They were there every day, making sure they had what they needed, make sure they had tent supplies and stuff like that for when they did move out of the hotel. Next slide, please. Sorry. So in acknowledging partnerships, at the Oregon Convention Center, I cannot say enough about the work that Dr. Vines, Aaron Moning, and Andrea Trong did in establishing rapid testing at OCC. They put in many, many hours and work pulling it together. So a huge shout out to them. All shelter participants that entered the OCC were tested for COVID-19 prior to entering the shelter. When we expanded and needed more testing done, Fire and Rescue conducted rapid testing at OCC overnight, as well as supported our transportation efforts. I want to make a huge note that in all 3 of our severe weather shelters, there were 0 positive tests or referrals to the VMOs during the severe weather shelter or severe weather event. Also an acknowledgement for all of their hard work, transition projects for setting up and staffing OCC shelter. The Multnomah County Emergency Management for setting up and staffing 2 severe weather, the 2 severe weather shelters, Arbor Lodge and Metro Garage. Oregon Metro for providing the garage space for our open air sheltering. The 211 staff that worked around the clock, nonstop, making sure every call was answered and every request for transport was addressed. The Medical Reserve Corps for being on site at all the severe weather shelters to provide additional support. Again, the Rockwood CDC, which I mentioned before, and Cultivate Initiative. Cascadia Behavioral Health, as always. And the 86 county staff, 20 city staff, and 105 community volunteers for providing essential staffing during the severe weather event. Next slide, please. So the Joint Office will continue a severe weather response debriefing or conduct, with partners to evaluate the response and strategies used during this event. We will review what worked well and what didn't and adapt our strategies for future activations. The county and our partners will remain vigilant and be similarly prepared for future severe weather events in 2021. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed and hope there are no more, but we will be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Celeste.
And I have to say thank you so much to Mark and your entire team. Celeste, you were amazingly calm throughout this entire, I mean, even just now in your presentation, it just sounds as if it was so easy. You guys were so nimble and so responsive, and I know that none of you slept for 5 days. So I just want to thank you. I know early on in these conversations when we were thinking about, we wouldn't be able to offer no turn away shelter as we had no turn away as we had in every other severe weather since we've been doing this. And because of COVID, we were just really stressed. And I have to say we did it because of all of your quick thinking and hard work and calm in the face of some really scary times. So deepest of gratitude to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Mark, if I could add my thanks as well. And I want to thank all of you. And Mark, I want to thank you in the joint office as well. This has really been an incredibly difficult time. And I think we all agree we can always improve our response. But I think back to 2017 when we lost a community member to hypothermia, and we were all very upset about that. We pledged that collectively we could do better. And we did. And I think about this year, it was in the midst of a pandemic, long power outages. There were some significant challenges there, and Mark and the joint office and all of you stepped up to the plate. The Willamette Center, of course, lost its power. You were quick to move people to alternative locations. And Mark, it didn't go unnoticed that you and your staff personally filled all the shifts to keep Arbor Lodge running, and the Metro Garage and the Oregon Convention Center. And I think it was a really strong and important showing. I do think, just thinking forward, where some of the next holes to be plugged are, the chair and I had a number of conversations about how we generate more volunteers, and we should never find ourselves in a position where we have to close a facility in the middle of a weather emergency because we just don't have enough volunteers. So that may be the next area that collectively our little group needs to think about. How do we make that more accessible and get more folks who are interested in volunteering? I know we sent out a lot of emails and we prodded a lot of people, and I was pleased to see the response we did get. I wonder if we couldn't do better going forward and think about some ways based on the experience that you just had over the last few days. Mark, personal thank you. You put in ridiculous hours and you still had the energy to show me around, and I want to thank you for that personally.
Thank you, Mayor. I will pass that on to the whole team because there is a collective effort. This is what that looks like. It was everybody showing up to do whatever they could do. And, I want to acknowledge on the staffing, there was a lot of effort that went into filling every shift, and we did, but I think it's also notable that we were asking people to come work in congregate shelter settings during a pandemic. And, that we knew that was going to be a huge lift for us. We worried a lot about what we might be able to do. And at the end of the day, we were able to find people to keep everything going, but it was hard. Hopefully next year it'll be a little bit easier. But yeah, that was definitely an identified risk coming into this winter, and I think we managed pretty well. And I want to acknowledge that Transition Projects put a lot into their own staff, keeping these spaces open, but also recruiting volunteers and training volunteers, many of whom then were able to show up in this work despite the pandemic. So thank you for that, Mayor.
I just wanted to briefly jump in and say that my little 15-minute walk, which was more like a 45-minute walk a couple days down to the Arbor Lodge shelter, was really a great experience to see all of your team in action. It was also nice to finally meet you, Mark, live. I think people don't realize what it's like to be onboarded during COVID, and we pretend this is real, but it's a lot more real once you finally meet someone live. And I was just really impressed. And also it was great to have conversations with the houseless folks, and especially conversations about people wanting to work. And so when we get to workforce issues, it was just affirming to get that kind of testimony. Anyway, bravo. It was great to see all of it in action.
I want to echo Dan's
Mark?
comments. Oh, sorry, Cindy.
No, that's okay. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Okay. So I want to echo Dan's comments and Chair and Mayor's comments, and thank you all very much for all of the time spent. Incredible work. I just can't help but reminisce on the fact that this is our second call in a row where we've been talking about a climate emergency. And you know, we're headed, I guess, back into wildfire season. So, you know, winter doesn't seem to be the only problem here, right? And long-term shelter is obviously preferable. Given that we're having these climate emergencies on a regular basis now, I'd like to see a written plan for capacity expansion, given the fact that we have the financial resources now for permanent shelter through the Here Together funds. So is that, Mark, is that something that we can get a brief on the next time we meet?
So we can certainly talk more about that. I mean, the Metro measure is really about creating permanent housing options for folks. So, and it can be a resource for us around some of these sheltering strategies as well. But we can certainly talk about the kind of preparation for and what it means to be prepared for these emergencies. There's a lot of planning work that our emergency operations folks and the Department of County Human Services, and I really need to call them out in this because their staff do a lot of the work around standing up those county-led shelters during severe weather and during fire. So we can work with them to come forward and sort of brief you on what exactly does exist in terms of climate emergency response, because the climate emergency response generally is inclusive of people who are unsheltered, as well as folks who are displaced from their homes as a result of a fire, for example. So we can certainly help lay the foundation for that, and then talk with you about sort of what additional work we need to do as you know, you rightly say, we continue to have, and probably will have more of these kind of climate emergency situations that are going to impact folks who are unsheltered.
So the Here Together funds can be used for shelter space, correct?
They can, it's an allowed use, but the measure of success for the Metro measure is not how many people we have in shelter, it's how many people we support in housing. And so as we allocate those resources, we have to be mindful of sort of honoring the commitments that were made to get people housed and keep them housed. So there's, and when we can talk more about that too as the kind of budgeting work happens, but we're, you know, there is in the short, at least as we represented it in the local implementation plan, we have the ability in the immediate term to make some investments in shelter capacity, but what we really have the opportunity to do is move people through shelter and into housing more quickly and better leverage the large numbers of shelter investments that we're already making as a community. So it's a little bit of a both and, but the metrics for the measure are about how many people did we house? Did we actually reduce homelessness? And shelter doesn't do that. It's housing that does that. So we have to be mindful of that sort of commitment under the measure. I see, Michael, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it's really important as we think about how we invest those resources in Multnomah County, that the eligibility to spend that funding on shelters is really important from a regional perspective, because our neighboring counties literally have none. And so I think that's where, you know, I would want again, from a regional perspective, that's where I would want to see those kinds of resources prioritized, and hopefully then needs are met in those counties, because that's where people live, and also it takes some of the pressure off of our shelter system as well.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think
Cindy?
that
Oh,
makes sense. It seems like it's needed and there's additional resources needed in every county for that, since it's the, the entry point into the system for many, at least we find that at New Avenues. They start at the drop-in shelter and progress into permanent supportive housing.
Cindy, I'm sorry, you have your hand raised.
That's that's okay. I forgot to raise my hand. Two things. One is, I just wanted to acknowledge, I think every time you and I have had a conversation, you were in the midst of like some sort of an emergency in it. And I'm sure it feels like the last, I don't know, 14 months has just been one constant emergency, and the winter storm was just one more thing on top of that. And I know that everybody put in so many long hours. So thank you very much. I know there were a lot of call outs. I do want to offer something, which is to the question about, how do we better prepare in terms of volunteer capacity? So we have an arm within United Way called Hands on Greater Portland. And, one of the things that we learned with wildfires is that there is an opportunity for us to be much more prepared as communities. Lots of different things in terms of, how do we better inform, educate, raise awareness with BIPOC community, language translation with documentation, a bunch of things like that. But volunteerism would also be a very large part of that. And I'd like to offer that, it might be worthwhile to have a conversation with our impact team, which manages Hands on Greater Portland, to see if there's a way to proactively engage volunteers who might be interested, whether it's a wildfire or it's a snowstorm, and kind of inventory their capacity and capability so we know who to call on when in order to mobilize volunteers. So maybe that's something we can help with.
That is a wonderful idea, and we will take you up on that. Thank you. All right, so I'm a little mindful of time, but I see two more hands up, Commissioner Ryan and Mayor. So Commissioner Ryan, I saw you first.
Sure, thank you, Mark. I'm going to say something that it's, the executive committee member says something that all of you have thought about many, many times. So here it goes. So what I did notice is the challenge for some people to come inside, even though they were not in a good place. It's because they don't want to leave their possessions. And so I kept thinking about the storage units, and even in a temporary situation like this, what kind of reliable, secure storage can we provide for their belongings? I just want to again applaud the fact that I don't know the information now on who lost their life. I know that probably some people did lose their life, but it's more that I know because we offered these shelters, a lot of lives were saved. So please know I'm always going to acknowledge that. But I just wanted to, while we're debriefing, acknowledge that challenge of people being very attached to their life possessions. And even though they're in tons of snow and mud and just awful conditions, that would keep people from not coming inside.
That is very much a dynamic, and our outreach teams think a lot about that, and we do too, but we can definitely bring that back around for creative solutions going forward, because that has been an issue, that. Yeah, Mayor.
Thank you. And this won't be resolved here, but this issue does keep coming up, and I feel like we need a resolution on the question of the longer term needs to house people and connect that housing with services so that people are successful in that housing, and the emergency we are seeing on our streets today, and having the resources and the capacity to deal with the emergency that we are seeing right now on the streets. And a lot of the emergency that we're seeing on the streets today is not going to be resolved by housing. It's going to be resolved by emergency responses. And that may be as simple as an organized tent camp, or it may be more access to hygiene, or it might be connections to food or warmth or social services. But I'm nervous when I hear the pushback to immediate shelter. And the reason I'm particularly nervous about it right now is I know what the next storm is that's coming. We all know what it is. And what it is the eviction cliff. And the eviction cliff is going to be caused by a lack of support at the federal level, which will filter down to the state level. But ultimately, it's going to be a local government response that either solves that problem or does not solve that problem. And I don't think we can sit here and suggest that we have enough resources to deal with the coming crisis that we all know is coming. So I hope we're flexible. I realize the commitments that were made to the voters. I understand that shelter was certainly on the table. I certainly thought it was, and I helped raise money for the proposal. But as leaders, I hope we'll also acknowledge that we're in a changing dynamic environment where the crises are multifaceted and they are expanding. And so I hope we remain flexible to be able to address some of the issues that Vanessa and others have raised. But I don't think we've resolved this question. And I feel like at some point we need to call the question and we need to resolve it. Otherwise, it's going to continue to hang out there in all of these discussions.
Councilor Palmero, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Yeah, I'm very concerned about the eviction crisis looming in the future. I hope we can talk more about that. But I want to say, Mark, there were two people that were, I don't know if they were organizing volunteers, but they were very good at their job. They were helping me try to get down to the Metro Garage air shelter. I couldn't make it. I tried twice. I don't know how you made it down there, but I tried to make it. I couldn't make it, but they were offering Uber rides. Fortunately, no one came up in my area to pick me up, but they were very good at what they did. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it. And I want to know a little bit more about the severe weather kits and information about that. So I could give that information on to other organizations that are working with these folks out here. So thank you.
Celeste, do you want to say briefly what is in the severe weather kits, and then we'll move on to the LIP, which will dovetail with the conversation we were just having before too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Yes, in each of these kits, we provided a tent, 0-degree sleeping bag, 2 tarps, 1 or 2 tarps, rain ponchos, hand warmers, masks, hand sanitizer, gloves and hats. And then on the side, we also had the sweatsuits, sweatpants, sweatshirts. Oh, there were also socks in the kits. So every individual that left, like the Metro Garage or OCC, each had a kit to go with them. So they had these this gear ready to go. So yeah, thank you.
All right. Celeste, thank you. And Celeste in particular was tireless in this, and as the chair pointed out, so thank you for everything that you did, Celeste. Incredibly grateful to you. So thank you all. So let's go on to the next agenda item, which is the Metro, I believe. Paul, am I right here? The Metro measure?
Correct.
All right, fantastic. We have an opportunity to take a few minutes to update you on where we are in that process. Nui Becerra, who has been leading the local implementation plan development process for us, is here. Welcome, Nui. Do you want to provide the committee with an update?
Sure, thanks, Mark. Everybody, thanks for having me here. Nui Becerra, she, her pronouns. As Mark mentioned, I'm working to further the SHS measure implementation, and part of that requires developing the plan. So that's the first thing I'll provide an update on is this very day, today, this morning, the Metro Oversight Committee met and unanimously approved our plan to move forward with some considerations that include providing a detailed budget when that's able to be provided. And for us, that is underway, and that's part of our normal county budgeting process. Also a call to align more closely with the mental health sector, both in our investments, but then also just aligning services more closely and understanding kind of the analysis that we've done throughout the plan from a mental health perspective to the degree that's possible. So that was another one of the considerations. And then the final consideration was around really working to expand the capacity of culturally specific providers in particular. So I do want to take a moment and just, feel the fact that the plan is moving forward, which is great. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we did want to take some time to, announce the approval that the plan will be moving forward and kind of just revel in that for a little bit. So thank you to everybody who's been a part of that, which includes everybody here. All of the folks we engaged with throughout the engagement process that created the plan, our staff, of course, and folks who raised really good questions in the process and provided really great insight to make the plan as good as we could make it at the time. So we look forward to moving forward with implementation, and I will just give a very brief update on where we are with that. I'm going to highlight a couple of areas. Really what we're prioritizing first in our implementation for this plan is to bring those programs that we said we would bring online in this next fiscal year to actually operationalize them. And that you'll find that in the local implementation plan, planned investments for year 1 section. And that has to do with all of the programs that we mentioned we would operationalize in support of housing. So those programs are well underway right now. The planning conversations have already started between our supportive housing or our permanent supportive housing team at the joint office and the different partners where those conversations need to happen to actually move that work forward. So, I'll provide a couple examples there. So our team is working with our behavioral health department on figuring out how to pair rent assistance with assertive community treatment teams and get those folks leased up, get them housed. That conversation is actually going to expand slightly to a regional conversation, which is great. So the other 2 counties, while they're a little bit more behind in their plans, they're at least going to send representatives to our conversations to make sure that that information can then go back to them as they also plan to provide, a similar kind of program with their plan as well for ACT team rent assistance. So another example of that is that we have folks that are staying currently in our high-risk COVID motels, and there have been a series of planning meetings that have already happened to figure out what the housing solutions for those folks would be, who are we serving, where is the rental assistance going to come from, et cetera. So those, that another example of a program that's well underway. So all of the programs that were listed in that category under supportive housing, we are moving forward with operationalizing them at this time, led by our PSH team again. Another piece of the planning work has really focused, or the implementation work has really focused around bringing a regional long-term rent assistance program framework online. So currently the 3 counties have been involved in planning meetings, I think now for the last 3 months, on setting a policy framework for regional long-term rent assistance. Now the other 2 counties don't have local long-term rent assistance programs yet. So they're going to spend, I think, a lot of these next few months building that from the ground up. Whereas we will be taking some of that policy framework, which is largely based on our own local program, and enhancing our long-term rent assistance program locally. So the way this program will work is it'll have a regional policy framework that is implemented locally at each of the county levels. So those conversations have been happening, as I mentioned. Probably most of the folks here saw already a call to participate in a survey to influence that policy framework. So we are in the process now as a work group for the Regional Long-Term Rent Assistance Program to go through that feedback and then basically adjust what the draft policy framework looks like right now. So that work is underway. And of course, after that's complete, then as I mentioned before, the other 2 counties will be building their program. We'll be working to enhance our program to largely align with the supportive housing programs we said we'd bring online in this first year, and then to kind of hold the different rent assistance resources that we will bring online in this next fiscal year. So implementation wise, that's kind of what we're focusing on programmatically. We are also working to, we know that there's going to be a lot of community engagement that's going to start around March and continue to the rest of this calendar year. And that's going to focus on several different areas. One, bringing more culturally specific providers, especially smaller organizations, into our system to be qualified vendors for services. Understanding what the capacity needs are of organizations in general, CBOs that provide these services. So we've developed a strategy specifically for culturally specific organizations. We're developing an engagement strategy around permanent supportive housing and the different kind of more policy questions we want to ask around, for our 2,235 unit strategy for permanent supportive housing expansion. What do those units look like? How do they break down by households, populations, locations, geography across the county, et cetera. So we are working on engagement strategies in a number of different fronts right now that will start this spring and kind of last again through this calendar year. So that was just a brief update on where we are, and I will open up to questions if folks have any.
Commissioner Myron has her hand raised.
Great.
Thank you. I am just wondering, I think some of what I wonder about will hopefully tie into some of our conversation with community solutions and also the, by name count and some of that in the later conversation. So hopefully we'll circle back to that. But I'm just curious if there's any more conversation or thoughts about where we can discuss having sort of some of those, the local measures that we might want to meet that outside of the broader metro measures.
Mark, do you want to take this or want me to take this?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take it.
I just want someone to say that one of our measures, one of our goals is to decrease chronic homelessness. I just want that somewhere as an outcome.
I think we plan to report on that anyway.
Okay.
We haven't set it as an official local goal yet because we've only committed to the metro metrics in our local implementation plan.
Yeah.
That said, we do plan on leading a process by which we establish additional or local metrics, however we call that. Probably with the support of a TA provider. And we are actually going through a TA and consulting provider evaluation process right now that's at a regional level, which will wrap up this week. And we should have folks in our qualified vendor pool by next week, which is exciting.
Stacy.
Sure. So thank you, Nui. And it's really exciting to hear the Oversight Committee approve this today. We at Transition Projects have been having a number of conversations with other providers, just trying to get a sense of how they're preparing for these resources, but being able to help so many more people. And one conversation that has come up a couple of times is just around meeting the behavioral health needs for folks once they do move into PSH, and the capacity of our local mental health and substance use disorder kind of support system, whether it's through a community-based organization or the health department. And that's something I will say that I'm concerned about, that capacity and that ability to deliver services to folks that we're not really meeting their needs right now while they're sleeping unsheltered, and soon they're going to be in housing. And we want to make that housing, we want to do whatever we can to try to make that housing stick and maintain good relationships with property managers and not further, derail someone's rental history. And so I guess I'm just curious what, at your planning level, or maybe others can speak to it, what are the conversations looking like in terms of the capacity of our mental health and substance use partners?
So I'll just jump in a little bit on this. So this has been a clear directive, right? Sort of immediate term. The LIP is at a pretty high level in terms of recognizing that we need to make strategic behavioral health investments, and not just at the post-housing placement level, that we actually need to figure out how to get more behavioral health services out to the streets, into the shelters, into transitional programs. So we've been doing a lot of really close coordination with our health department over the last several months, thinking about this upcoming budget and our ability with the Metro measures to start to sort of address some of those specific areas of need. And there's more of that to do, right? There's some things that we can kind of see now as opportunities, and we're going to need to get around the table with our behavioral health providers, our peer support organizations, the health department, sort of, and that's one of those critical conversations that Nui's talking about, right? Is the very specific ways in which we need to expand behavioral health services. We've had some good conversations with health share leadership as well, and the AHFE folks, because, you know, that's the Regional Supportive Housing Investment Fund folks, you know, where they're looking at a world in which we now have the Metro measure on a regional basis, and where can we partner with the health systems to expand behavioral health services in particular, right? Because those are services that in many cases would be appropriately funded through Medicaid, and are places where they're not available to us. And we need to fill some of those gaps, but we also need to be looking for ways to fully leverage that Medicaid system for the benefit of the folks that we're talking about. So that work is, I think, for the very reasons you talk about, Stacey, like this measure needs that kind of alignment and integration of how the homeless response system and the behavioral health system to be successful. It's there in the LIP, and we're moving as quick as we can. We know with the support of the, you know, with the support of the county board, ultimately there are going to be some things that we can do right away, and then there's some work to do to be ready for next fiscal with a more comprehensive set of behavioral health strategies around this. Michael, you've got your hand up, and then Chair.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Stacey for raising this issue, and it's been a while since I've said this in this space, but I think when in these conversations, it's important to return to the idea that we don't just need more of the existing capacity in the behavioral health system, but we need capacity that doesn't exist, and folks, or exists at a very small amount. But, you know, our experience at the Bud Clark Commons, for example, is that we have people who are able to sustain their housing, but at times need inpatient supports, and sending a behavioral health specialist to meet with them is not enough. And we have folks who may not be able to be stable in permanent supportive housing, but it's the best solution available right now. And if folks are not able to be stable in permanent supportive housing, then we risk the idea that permanent supportive housing is not a successful model when we have gaps in the behavioral health system that are, you all hear me. So yeah, we need that.
Chair.
Thanks. And I think we've talked about this a lot. This is one of the reasons why the minute that this ballot measure passed and in the creation of it, we really had a strong emphasis on the behavioral health. The minute this measure passed, I called the joint office and the health department to put their big brains together and start coming up with plans. It is unfortunate for at least the county commission that we are in this situation right now where, because we're in the middle of the budget process and I haven't come out yet with the executive budget, it's hard to talk about. We're not supposed to be talking about the specific items that are going to be included in the agenda, but in my budget. But when that comes out, we will start the public conversation and the conversation among commissioners about which programs, specific programs with outcomes and outcome measures tied to it. But this is definitely at the forefront, is not just tying services to housing, but increasing and broadening the amount of services that are out there. And it's going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight. We know that. We definitely need a lot more culturally specific providers. We need, like you're talking about, Michael, kind of the continuum of services. So there's a lot more coming in that front.
Okay, so there's some great stuff we're capturing in the chat in terms of future agenda items along these lines too. And we will continue to come back as this work of implementation moves forward. Before we move off of this agenda item, I want to recognize, I think Patricia Rojas, who is our Deputy Director, is on the call. Welcome. So by now, most of you know that Patricia is getting ready to leave the joint office, which will be an enormous loss for us. She's been such an amazing partner to all of us and leader in the joint office that it is hard to imagine our team without her. And the good news is that Patricia is going to Metro to lead the housing work related to the implementation of this regional measure. There is not a better person that could be doing that work. And so as hard as it is to have her lead the joint office, I think we are all incredibly excited about what she's going to be able to do to support this effort at Metro. So Patricia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you all. I am like going to get very emotional, probably. I'm just so grateful for the amazing opportunity to work with this team. Sorry, give me a second. Let me get it together. Sorry. So this team does really, truly transformational work, and I'm just so honored to have been a part of it. The team is committed to ending homelessness, to ending racism, and to creating a more just society. And that happens every day, making steps towards all of those things. And I'm just so humbled to have been a part of that and to have learned so much from my colleagues. It is a team of experts, and it is the shared values and vision and the expertise in the strategies that we know to work that have led to some really phenomenal outcomes. I think folks earlier were talking about, the cliff, eviction prevention concerns. And so far, though data is still being entered, we know that 6,200 households received rent relief. $25 million went out in less, it was about 6 months. And 79% of those households that received funding identified as BIPOC. And that is some very quick, intentional turnaround work because we're flexible, because we're committed to one another and to the work. And I just want to say that is transformational work. We have 12,000 people who have ended homelessness and are in permanent housing. And those are the kinds of values and lessons, wisdom that I appreciate and I'm going to be taking with me into my role in Metro to do what I can to support and continue to support you in your efforts in ending homelessness, but also into bringing those same values and vision as we build a regional vision and infrastructure to end homelessness. So I will say this is not goodbye. You will hear from me and we'll continue to work together. And I look forward to doing that. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you all for your commitment, for your support of this work, for your support of this office. As hard as things can be sometimes with all of the crises and everything that comes our way, we are collectively making an enormous impact in this community. And so remember that as when things get hard, because those are the outcomes that really matter, is the impact in human beings' lives and in our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. So we will have you back to share your vision as the Metro Regional Housing Director. Is that the title? Something like that. at a future meeting. We will look forward to it. All right, so we now have a discussion about data. I'm going to very briefly set this up. I think this emerged originally out of two places. One, the discussions we were having around doing a point in time count, or whether to do a point in time count this year, given the pandemic and our decision not to move forward with that. And at that time, we talked a lot about other ways that we might understand the dimensions of need in our community. And we talked specifically about the by name lists that we maintain in the adult system, our family system, the domestic violence system, and the youth system. And the ways in which the by name list, because it is updated on a regular basis, gives us a pretty good insight into who's experiencing homelessness, including unsheltered homelessness. And so there was a desire to kind of get a little deeper on that issue. And then at the same time, in the conversations around the Metro measure, and the recognition that with that measure, we really have an enormous both opportunity and responsibility to invest in an enhanced data system capacity, to build off the work that we've been doing in this community for a long time, but certainly over the last 5 years in the Joint Office, to really deepen our use of data, our access to data, our use of data, especially around racial equity issues. But recognizing that with the Metro measure, there's an opportunity to do more and to learn more about how to best utilize data in our systems. And it led to a conversation that with a group called Community Solutions that has been working with cities around the country on a project called Built for Zero. So what we're doing today is sort of bringing those two conversations together. We've invited Community Solutions to be here and asked our coordinated access team and our data team to also be here to follow up on some discussions with Community Solutions to kind of set a better context for this committee around what we can do and what we already do as it comes to data. So I think Commissioner Ryan, you wanted to kick this off. I'll turn it over to you to introduce the Community Solutions folks.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate that. I first became aware of Community Solutions. Well, actually, I became impressed with them instantly when I saw them present several years ago at a presentation in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was November 2018. It was election day, actually. And Roseanne Haggerty is the CEO, and she gave an amazing presentation. It was a reminder that it's a collective work, that the real solutions lie in the community organizations. And it's so important that we have real data that really actualizes that you have a functioning system, that you can really measure what's going on. You can look at what progress looks like. And most importantly, since we know that there's always people behind the data, it really gets down to the granular level eventually of knowing each of our residents, our houseless residents by name. So I think it was my first week on the job and I reached out to Roseanne. And so I've been on this for about 5-6 months. It's been a minute. And I'm just so delighted that today Community Solutions will be presenting. And I look forward to them adding value into our work here in Multnomah County. And what I've always liked about their approach is it's shared. It's about building capabilities. It's not about coming in and dazzling us and then leaving. It's about really making sure that we build this with our great people that are on the ground. I also think it's important to note that Community Solutions works with Clackamas and Washington counties, which is obviously really important with the Metro Supportive Housing Measure. And they also work with Marion County and Lane County. So they really have an Oregon context and focus. I just want to welcome Jake McGuire into the room and for being here today. And I want to hand this presentation over to you, Jake. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Hey, y'all. Thanks for having me at your meeting, especially jumping in halfway through. I'm going to maybe try to share my screen. Hopefully that'll work out. All right. Yeah, here we go. All right. Can I just get a quick thumbs up that everybody can see my screen? Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you, Commissioner Ryan. I've had conversations with several folks on the call, so thanks to everybody who's asked good questions and educated me a little bit more about Multnomah County and your context. I want to talk a little bit about Built for Zero, sort of what it is, why we think it would be really exciting to have Multnomah joining that effort, and to really zero in on the pieces of our work that really have to do with improving data quality and helping you all have better access to the data that you have. Before I do that, I just want to tell you really briefly who we are, apart from Commissioner Ryan's introduction. Community Solutions has been sort of a 30-year project, although we haven't always been the organization that we are. But our history, just so you know, sort of who you're talking to, and some of our thought journey, is for somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 years, we were really housing developers. We built affordable housing throughout New York City, around 3,000 units. And our thinking was sort of, this is a housing problem, and if we just build as much supportive housing as we can, this problem will begin to go away. But over that time, even though we were building more supportive housing than anybody in the country, homelessness didn't go down in New York. In fact, it went up, and was even accelerating the rate it was growing. And we really, I think, began to lean into the hard truth that we were going to have to think about the systems that govern access to housing and how those systems sort of play together if we really wanted to solve this problem. I won't go through this whole slide, but our journey since then has really been about this question of population level reductions. What would it take to see fewer people homeless across the whole community, instead of just how do we get better outcomes for the people that happen to be in the programs that we have in front of us. Having said that, I want to suggest that where you all sit, you have a couple key problems, not problems with the decisions you've made, but challenges that you have to deal with that you probably didn't ask for. The first is that if you're on this call, by definition, you are held accountable for some element of this problem, but you don't have total authority over it. And I bet that you wish you did. I've never met anybody in this work who didn't say, if only people would just listen a little more to me, or if I could pull a few more of the levers myself, I really think we could get some things done. But that's not how it works. You probably recognize a lot of these agencies on the screen, these entities. They exist in your community. They exist in every community. They don't all report to each other. They're funded in different ways. They have different incentive structures. And as much as there are some places where key amounts of authority are consolidated, it really is in no community in America any single entity's job to end homelessness. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge for anybody really being able to be accountable for the problem. You also have accountability without as much line of sight as you might like to have into how the problem actually works and what's going on. This is a real map from a community we worked with just outside of LA. We brought 7 agencies that touch pieces of the housing process together, and we just asked them if they would map out the process for a single person to move from the street into permanent housing. This is the process they collectively governed and controlled. But it took them about 3.5 hours to map out what you see in front of you. Each green box is a different step in this journey. And at the end, I think they were sort of horrified by the process that they themselves administered, realized that they really didn't have clear line of sight into how things were working in their system. And then, of course, they were turning around and blaming individuals who couldn't get through this process and saying, well, I guess they just don't want housing, or I guess they just don't want help, when in fact, it was really their own process that was so much the challenge, and their inability to see into it. The third challenge you have is you have accountability without a meaningful feedback loop. What do I mean by that? What I mean is I'm going to say to you that I think it is not going out on too much of a limb to suggest that you don't know at any given time how it is that you're doing as well as you wish that you did. This is a news story from Burlington, Vermont, Chittenden County. This is what kind of drove them to seek out Built for Zero as one possible avenue for some support. But the headline was basically their point in time count showed a 24% increase in chronic homelessness. And they were freaking out. The county executive was getting it from all sides. The mayor was getting hit hard. They thought they had been doing things well and adopting a lot of positive changes. And they joined Built for Zero. And the first thing that we did was work with them to get to a place where they could actually look in real time, or at least monthly, at the total number of people experiencing homelessness across that community and be sure that they weren't missing anybody, street, shelter, or otherwise. And I went back after a year and I plotted that data out monthly. And what you can see here is with really no change to that system, over the course of the next year, they saw swings up or down of as much as 23%, just in the course of the normal variation that's built into that system, right? So things weren't getting better or worse. This is just what a system that fluctuates looks like. And here they were being held accountable or being celebrated, depending on the year and really depending on the month that you pulled this data. So apart from questions about whether this data is accurate, I hope it's pretty clear that it wouldn't even be particularly useful to you, even if you felt confident that it was accurate, because it's not a reflection of what's really happening in your system over time. So I think that leads us to the fundamental question, especially with the opportunity that you all have in front of you with the Metro measure and the incredible amount of funding and support that you're about to pull down with the support of taxpayers, which is, are all your programs and investments across your whole community adding up to something and really to the thing you all want, which is equitable reductions in homelessness over time? Apart from how your individual programs are doing or how individual people are being served, is the result of everything you're doing that fewer people are homeless at any given moment? And if not, my follow-up question to you would be, how quickly would you be able to know that? And then how quickly would you be able to take action on that data or pivot as a whole system if you could figure out that there were things you wanted to do differently? And in most communities, the answer is, to the blue box, we don't know. And then to the pink box, not very fast, not very quickly. Built for Zero exists to try to help you solve those challenges. What we think you need is really an operating system for ending homelessness. It's a different way that you would all work together. And when you think about more housing or more services or better information, those are all really just inputs into a different way of working as a whole community that would enable more accountability across all the different layers of your response. We think the operating system has 5 parts. First, a shared measurable aim. Are you all agreed that you really want to end homelessness in this community? But more importantly than that, that you'd measure that in the same way and you're working toward that every month. The second is a nimble, sort of integrated team. Are all the folks who touch this problem connected, not just in the sense that there's some formal governance structure, but in a way that would actually enable you to take nimble action on a regular basis? Do you have a rapid by name feedback loop? Do you know at least monthly how many people are homeless and who they are and what they need? And then these last boxes, which is where most people start, do you have the right best practices, technical strategies like housing first, and do you have the housing and service dollars that you need? But those things actually, it's very hard to know the answers to those last questions until you sorted out the first 3 things. When we talk about a shared aim on Built for Zero, we're talking about what we call functional zero. For most populations, this means that you're never going to have more people experiencing homelessness than you know you can house that month. So it's not that no one may ever experience a housing crisis ever again, but if, let's say, a veteran falls into homelessness, you know that you'll never have more veterans experiencing homelessness than you can house that month. But for chronic homelessness, which is a little different because it's really a function of time, you have a whole year to deal with somebody before they age into this category. And so we work with the federal definition of an end to chronic homelessness because we actually think something much, much closer to a hard zero ought to be possible. So here we're really looking for 0.1% of your whole homeless population is chronic, or 3 people, whichever is greater. In your community, that's probably going to be 3 people is what it would look like to end chronic homelessness. So your community would all have to be bought in to this shared aim. Or we agree we're working toward this measure, trying to get down to this really objectively measurable assessment of how many people are experiencing homelessness. We also ask communities to buy in upfront to a series of racial equity measures. So some ways of looking at how your system is performing. Equity is not something you measure once and move on. We all know that. This is an ongoing sort of living challenge for your system. But the question is, are there in some key domains, some ways that you could look at whether or not your system was actually serving people equitably? Because we don't want to get to an end to homelessness and find out that the only people left ever falling into homelessness, for example, are all Black or all Native or something like that. I don't think any of us would say that that would define success. When communities have committed to those ways of thinking about the work, we start working with you to try to pull the right team to the table. There are lots of people on this call. There are lots of people who touch homelessness. But the question is, what would a sort of smaller action team that could really look at the data on a regular basis and then pull in the right people as appropriate need to look like? And do you have all those people at the table? We call that the command center, which is just a word we borrowed from disaster response. We think it's the way that homelessness response actually needs to work in communities. And I'm going to spend, probably the bulk of the rest of my time here. What would it look like to get to a place where you had really, really quality data on homelessness on a regular basis? We think quality data looks like 4 things. First, is your data comprehensive? In other words, does everybody mean everybody? HUD only asks that you know all the people that are using your programs, for example. What we want to make sure is if someone's on the street, if they're in shelter, if they're in some kind of program, if they're accessing services, if they're not, they should be known to your community in a way that is central so that all of the people organized around a response to homelessness can conference around their case and try to serve them better. That data needs to be person specific. So do you not just know anonymously, like a point in time count, that someone is out there? You have some vague sense of how many people, but you actually know who they are. You can start to separate people's experiences and say people are having different experiences and they might need different kinds of help to be successful. Do we have enough information to make determinations about how to serve different people? And is that information appropriately privacy protected so that only people who need to have access to people's unique identifying information, for example, have that access? Is that information updated on a regular basis? We say at least monthly. If you can do even more frequently, then so much the better. But this means every single person experiencing homelessness in your community, you should have an update on what's happening with them at least once a month. If somebody's moving from one program to another, we should know that. If someone is moved into housing and they're no longer experiencing homelessness, we should have the ability to take them off of our list. If they're back in homelessness because something didn't work, we should know that quickly and with some reliability. And then finally, does that data, when we look at that all together, is it quantitatively reliable? And what we mean there is just, does it balance like your checkbook? So if you think about all the people that came into homelessness in this community in this month, and all the people that exited homelessness in this month, the math there should predict the actual number of people you can count in front of you, just like the way you manage, or we used to manage, our checkbooks and our bank accounts. And if not, then you have some kind of reporting error or data accounting error or something that you need to dig into to make sure that the data in front of you is meaningful. Why would you want this kind of data quality on a regular basis? Real-time data enables a couple things. The first is smarter triage. This is probably the one we're most familiar with. It means you can serve individual people better. You won't connect someone to permanent supportive housing who actually maybe just needs a one-time cash infusion. You won't connect someone to rapid rehousing who actually maybe needs much more intensive support than that. You'll be able to triage and prioritize the resources you have more intelligently. The second, though, is you can sort of zoom out on that data set and treat it like system analytics. So you could say, how is our whole system performing across all of these individual people? Where are people getting stuck in the system? Where is this flow from the street into permanent housing not working? How are our Black and brown populations being served relative to white populations? How are gay, straight, or trans populations being served relative to each other, right? You want to be able to understand how the system as a whole is performing so that you can identify the leverage points for making things better. And then finally, this level of data quality over time can enable much, much smarter resource advocacy, and in your case, resource planning. It would be a shame, but it wouldn't be the first time if all of this money at the end of this bond period that you're about to infuse into your system did not produce meaningful reductions and hopefully an end to chronic homelessness across your community. But that has happened in many other places where they secure significant new resources and they aren't able to map out and plan the implementation of those resources effectively because they don't have line of sight into their system as it's moving and changing over time. And so I think the opportunity before you is to make sure that that's not happening, that you can model inflow and outflow stably over time and start to understand whether the resources that you have are getting the effects that you wanted. And if not, how you might need to move them around. The last thing I'll do is I'll walk you through a quick example, and then I just want to stop because I don't want to go over my time here. This is just real-time data from Chattanooga. It's a much smaller community than yours, obviously, but it's about 1 million people when you take the metro area. This is the monthly number of veterans in that community. So when they got to a place where they had that real-time person-specific data, they could basically start to build a line chart over time, just like this. That median going across the middle is just showing you what's normal in that system. It's not based on those dots behind it. It's based on sort of a key window, a performance window that's more toward the front of that graph. But what you're basically seeing is how many veterans are experiencing homelessness in this community. And you can see that through some really, really significant landlord outreach and process improvements to their voucher lease ups, they were able to drive pretty significant reductions in that number. But what happens in June or July of 2018 is they start to see that number climbing up again. And so you want to know a couple of things. First, is that normal variation or is that real change, right? Is that something we actually need to worry about? And second of all, if it is real change, what do we do about it and how fast can we take action? Chattanooga drilled down. This is in our basic data viz platform that's made available to every Built for Zero community. They drilled down and they looked at where that spike was coming from. And pretty clearly and quickly, they could see it was coming from new inflow. Those purple bars are inflow, the blue bars are outflow. So if you just think about it this way, you want your purple bars to be smaller than your blue bars, right? That's what it is to be reducing homelessness. Your outflow should be bigger than your inflow every month. If it's not, you're going backwards. So you can see here in Chattanooga, they started to go backwards in those first couple months. And when they drilled into that, they saw that about 73% of that was brand new inflow, so people they'd never seen before. So that's a problem. But actually about a quarter of their inflow was people that were coming back from housing and something hadn't stuck, and here they were experiencing homelessness again. So those are people we've already housed before. So you're kind of moving with this level of data quality from this concern that homelessness is going up among veterans to being able to say something more specific, which is that inflow is going up among veterans, to actually being able to say something much more specific, which is inflow among people we've already housed is a problem that we have in this system right now. And the good news is that's a leverage point that you can start to solve for. What they did in Chattanooga in response to this is really quickly, they called together all of their veteran housing providers. And they said, talk us through what you're doing to provide services and do retention work once people are in housing. They identified pretty quickly that their case management ratios were not evenly distributed across their programs. One of their programs in particular was not implementing best practices for service delivery and housing first. They did some really targeted retraining and they saw that number start to level off. And this is Chattanooga, the team there celebrating about a year later when they finally got all the way to zero on veteran homelessness. That's just one example. It's a pretty simple example for the purposes of just being able to illustrate how you could use data like this. In a community like yours, the data is probably going to show more complex things. But the goal here is, can the data give you concrete enough information that you could actually have a conversation about how we want to respond as a community, like not next year, not in 5 years when we get a new voucher allocation, but like this month, what are we going to do differently to try to bend this curve back down? I'll just end, I'll leave it here with some large city run charts. These are some large cities we're working with. You can see it's slow and steady progress in large cities, but these communities are moving in the right direction towards zero. I think that we could really see the same thing in Multnomah and in the Tri-County region. And I'm really looking forward, hopefully, to the opportunity to be able to join your team and support you all in doing that work. So thanks a lot.
Jake?
Yes, hi.
Hi. My name is Cindy Adams, and I am with the United Way here in Portland. One of the questions I have is more about the work that you do. I was on your website for a little while. So do you all help put the framework in place? Do you all provide the data infrastructure? So that's one or two questions, right? Because most recipient, well, every recipient of HUD funding has an HMIS system. So is this additive to the HMIS system, or is it replacement for the existing HMIS system? And then the last thing is, if this is more about approach and data infrastructure, and teasing the data out and understanding, like, you know, what are relevant steps to take, what part of this is reliant on, or what role does like a a different approach to the system, how impactful could that be? And so I'm thinking more specifically about like human-centered design work, right? In the homeless infrastructure, and how valuable or not necessarily valuable that incremental work would be to achieving positive results. Does that make sense?
Yeah, those are both great questions. Thank you for them. I'm happy to start with the first one. I think a way to summarize your question is like, what do we do? Which I'm happy to talk about. Built for Zero works by helping you do two things. So the first is we're going to connect one of our coaches, we call them an improvement advisor, someone trained in this science of help, doing complex systems improvement, to your community long-term. That person's going to work with the folks on this call to figure out who needs to be in that sort of command center we talked about, right? Who's the kind of core improvement team that can start to drive some of this work, first to get to quality data, and then to start to use that data to drive reductions. The goal is not to replace any of the infrastructure or the systems or the relationships that you all have built, but to figure out where is the work that's left to do to sort of knit those things together in a way that could effectively drive reductions over time. The second thing is, as I mentioned, we want to see you get to that quality data standard as quickly as possible. And to do that, we provide a couple of things. One is a set of data quality standards that you can sort of use as an assessment, right? So you can sort of, and in talking with Steve earlier today, I think there are some real opportunities here for sort of saying, where have you come, right? What's the state of your data? And then what does that leave to be done to get to a place where with this ease of access, you could pull down in real time that data picture that we're looking at. And then the second is we do have a visualization platform through our partnership with Tableau that will just help you visualize that information on a regular basis. And you saw some screenshots from some of those charts in the presentation. We are not an HMIS system. We're not a software developer. You need to do this work in HMIS. Your providers are not going to do double entry into some kind of additional system. It's really important to make this work in HMIS. And then information gets reported out of HMIS into that visualization platform to help you make sense of the data that's in HMIS and start to see insights and understand trends and patterns. The second question, which I think is about the value of, if I'm understanding your question correctly, the kinds of sort of system improvement work that we'd want to help you do and how we'd sort of coach you to do that, maybe relative to some of the other work you're doing to free up new resources, for example, or change policy. First, let me say, is that a good summary of the question you were trying to ask there, that second question?
Yeah, I guess maybe it was a little bit different, which is, it may be part of our challenge, and I don't think this is unique to Oregon. Maybe part of our challenge is the system that we've designed, however it's come about, that we leverage to try and help people get into permanent housing, whether it's permanent, supportive, or whatever, right? And your work is not a part, has nothing to do with that. Is that correct?
No, I wouldn't say that. Thanks for clarifying the question. I think that is the work. What we believe is that work fundamentally starts with getting meaningful line of sight into the way your system is operating. So the best way to think about what is your system, I would say, is that kind of those really high level data points that we want your system to be able to produce. In other words, how many people are entering homelessness every month? What kind of experience are they having in that system? And how effective is it proving at getting them out of homelessness on the other end, right? That's what we want to be able to see. And what we've seen in most of the communities where we work is that data offers the pathway into these conversations about how you would need to change the system that you have, the way it's designed, the way it's organized. I'll give you an example that's really salient right now. We work with 85 communities around the country. One of them was having a conversation with me recently about their efforts to engage this question of the VI SPDAT and whether or not it's producing structurally racist outcomes and inequitable outcomes in its housing recommendations. They dug into their data and they found that that assessment tool was in fact disproportionately prioritizing white people for more intensive housing interventions. So that's a really negative experience of the system that you're probably producing for Black and brown folks. It's also a disproportionate set of housing outcomes that you're producing on the other end of that system. And you can't end homelessness if that's the case. So what they did is they used that data set and dug in and then used the quality improvement or the sort of rapid testing approaches that we were teaching them to test some changes to that tool. Their data suggested that one of the biggest reasons why Black and brown folks were being screened out for those more intensive housing interventions was that they weren't getting points on that age category. So if you're 60 or older, that tool gives you a higher number of sort of vulnerability points. But when they looked at it, they realized that Black and brown folks in their system were so vulnerable that they actually weren't living long enough on the streets to even age into that vulnerability category, which ought to make your jaw just like fall to the ground, right? It's such a stark example of the racism in these systems that we've been talking about. So the test that they ran was just to remove age from their screening criteria altogether. Now they're not saying that's going to be our permanent solution. We definitely want to do that. But they said, what if we tried that for like 3 months across the system and see what happens? And they saw those results not equalize, but significantly begin to alter and come closer together in their housing recommendations. So I think it's a good example of how having this kind of data quality actually offers the way into those conversations around building a more human-centered system and also ultimately a more effective system that gets people into housing faster.
So
Thank you, Jake. And I guess, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Cindy, we got a couple other hands up, but you should finish your thought.
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, my apologies. Michael, I think I saw your hand go up first.
Actually, I think it was Commissioner Myron. Go ahead.
Oh, my apologies. I just saw it first. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much, Jake. That was an excellent presentation. And I mean, there's so much there. One of the things that has struck me, I'd previously expressed very strong feelings about doing some kind of a count. And I think I'd use point in time count generically as a count. And that's, I didn't mean it as a term of art. I meant some kind of a count this year for 2 reasons. One, because it is that, I hate to use the word, but I'm going to use it, unprecedented year with COVID, and we are going to be seeing unprecedented levels, I would imagine, of houselessness. The other reason being that is unique to our jurisdiction, to our county, is that we, or region, we just implemented this Metro Supportive Housing Measure, and we will be in having a brand new tax that the baseline year happens to be this very same year. And I feel that it is more important than ever that we have some sort of account, something that we can try to track and build on, et cetera. And so, the point in time counts always seem to be of pretty limited value. You make that argument very compellingly. But if we, I think what I love the idea of us, and I've always thought about a by name count, makes so much sense. And if we build to a rapid sort of by name feedback loop urgently, do you see the potential for being able to do this somewhat urgently, and that maybe we can get to a place where we can start getting the data that's so important this year in a meaningful way, building toward this better system?
Yeah. Mark, were you going to jump in there? Go ahead.
You should go ahead, but I think that's actually a helpful kind of segue to Steve and Katie Deneen, who oversees the adult coordinated access system and the by name registry. Both of you may want to weigh in just in terms of that question of like, the answer to that is in part, where are we now, right, as a community, and how far do we have to travel? So go ahead, Jake, but I just want to leave space for Steve or Katie to weigh in terms of how we feel about the by name list we have now, especially for chronically homeless people, and what we might need to do to get to that level of confidence.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's sort of what I was thinking as well. You know, should you do a count this year, I will leave that to you all who are much more versed in sort of what you need for your Metro Measure compliance than I am. You know, I think the goal would be that you would have the ability at any time ever to answer the question, how are we doing? How many people are out there? Who are they? What do they need? And so if you do a count, you know, my suggestion would be, could you use that as a way to actually kickstart this work, as opposed, you know, don't replicate a sort of standalone once a year exercise. Maybe as a transition to Steve,
Yes.
I would just say, I think what I found out from Steve earlier today is, I actually believe your region could get to quality data by our data center very quickly. And some of that is because of a significant adjustment in your infrastructure that your data team has just sort of put in place to make it much, much easier to pull this kind of information, which Steve can talk about. So I think the challenge then will just be to make sure the data is actually comprehensive, that everybody is captured and that you have quality data. But I think you've just put in place a significant improvement to your local infrastructure to make it possible to pull that information once you have it. So Steve, maybe I'll stop talking and turn it over to you if you want to say anything else about that.
Thank you, Jake. Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Richard. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the data team supervisor at the Joint Office. And I'm planning on talking a little bit about the data that we currently have and what we have and as our reporting capabilities with regard to coordinated entry. And I was going to start off in a place that perhaps would be a bit more digestible or approachable if maybe Katie, if you spoke a little bit about coordinated entry, what it is, how it works first. I mean, I'm happy to go through my stuff, but if you'd like to jump in first, and Mark, I see you.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Steve. So we're already at 3:52, which means we're not going to get to the full presentation. I think either for you or for me, we'll have to come back to this topic. So I think if can you and or Katie kind of reflect on this, the specific question here about like where we are with our coordinated access system, that data transformation that was just referenced, and kind of could we get there? Like what work could we do together to get to a point where we feel like we could sort of embark on the kind of work that Jake was just laying out.
I can just quickly jump in to say that what we have been able to build with coordinated access in our community is just like this network of providers. And so we really do have this base for when we do need to enact any kind of quick changes. So, you know, our network of assessors encompass, you know, shelter providers, outreach workers, housing specialists, and there's like some main door entries for folks, which is, you know, oftentimes by phone that they can call and get an assessment done. And then once their data is input, we have this network of trained assessors that can then do that, like you're saying, monthly, weekly, daily engagement with folks. And then all of our systems have case conferencing set up so that we really have that individualistic way of responding to, like, we weren't able to assess this person and this is why, or we assess this person, they're scoring low and we don't think that's an accurate representation of their vulnerability. And so we're able to really hammer down into the more minute details when it comes to a lot of folks. So that has been built. And then Steve can maybe touch on our data team just went through a really significant data transfer in the fall. And so we were able to go through our by name lists and both close folks that no longer needed services and do some follow-up work with folks to make sure that our data is a little bit more accurate than it was previously.
Yeah, and I can build off that a little bit. And to answer the question, you know, can we get there? And how quickly can we get there? The answers are yes, definitely. And great question. As far as whether, like, how quickly we can get there, it's really a matter of how how much we can dedicate our very limited capacity amidst the ongoing pandemic and amidst the implementation planning for the Metro measure, and a great deal of work that we haven't been able to get to historically. So that said, we've got all of the building blocks in place with coordinated entry data to be able to move this project forward. I was greatly heartened in listening to Jake's talk, both about our current situation and where we can go with our partnership. As far as reporting goes, you know, we've got the data so that we can and do report on at least a monthly basis on demographics of people that are in one of our 3 coordinated access lists. And if I say coordinated entry, by the way, I mean coordinated access. It's just a HUD term. We report on demographics, race, ethnicity, gender, disabling condition, chronic homeless status. We have prior living situation as well, so we can pull out the people who are on one of the coordinated access lists that were unsheltered, say, at time of assessment, or were in shared housing, doubled up, tripled up, or couch surfing situations. So we can drill into different subpopulations that are in one of our coordinated access lists. As a result of that data transfer, that kind of back end change that Katie alluded to, we can now also look at entries and exits, which paves the way for inflow and outflow analysis. That actually is freshly available, though it's not implemented in any sort of way that is available to the public or to any of you at this point, but we do have that capability. We can also do racial equity analyses for people that come onto the list and then go into permanent housing or exit to some other location in the community. And then we also have access to the full suite of vulnerability assessment data that everybody that is assessed and added to the list contributes to the system as well, which helps with their case conferencing and making sure that they get to the right program to meet their needs. We do also have existing reporting processes. I didn't want to miss an opportunity to just kind of plug the fiscal year 20 year-end report. So in, talking about unmet need, we would be remiss to not also talk about all of the work that the system's doing in quantitative data. The data that comes out of HMIS is only part of the picture, but it's a very important part of the picture, so we can see all of the lives that are touched by all of the work that happens already in the system. I'm going to drop the link to that report in the chat. And then before I forget, in case anybody has any questions, I'm also going to drop my email.
So Steve, I've got several hands up here that I want to make sure we get to. So do you want to close out any last thought before we jump over?
I'm very, very optimistic about where we go from here, and look forward to taking any questions or thoughts.
Thank you. I'm sorry things are so compressed. Michael, I know you were next now.
Thanks, Mark. So I just want to forewarn folks that I'm going to sound real sassy right now. So I'm going to start by saying that I fully understand and appreciate how important good data is, and I think we all understand we do need better data, and we should be continuously, looking at our system and improving it. So I'm not rejecting that idea. I do want us to be very careful about tying this to the idea of driving towards functional zero. We achieved functional zero in the veteran population in this community because we got dedicated resources above what had been allocated. And we actually, in the few years since we achieved that, we've continued to get VASH voucher allocations from HUD. So we're not seeing, the population of folks who are in poverty resourced. We're seeing a very specific population being resourced above what they had been, and we coordinated ourselves around that. When we launched A Home for Everyone, it was predicated on the idea that we had looked at inflow and outflow data, projected what it would take to reduce street homelessness within 2 years. The city and county made historic investments. We pointed all our strategies in the same direction at that. We made adjustments as we went. And if we had had better data, what it would have showed was that more people were becoming homelessness, because in the midst of those first couple of years, this rental market exploded and pushed thousands of people into homelessness. And homelessness writ large is happening in this country because of decades of federal disinvestment at a scale of billions and billions and billions of dollars. And when the rental market went crazy, what we needed were more regular vouchers for people. What we got was functionally fewer because we had to spend more money to keep people with existing vouchers housed in their apartments whose rents had gone bonkers. So I just, you know, if we've got $1 billion problem and we've got 500 million to solve it, like we can be as coordinated and understand the data as well as possible. And if we don't have the resources we need, we're going to have the community continue to point at the mayor and the commissioners and the chair and say, why aren't you solving this? And we have to be really clear that we have a very significant resource issue.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, Commissioner, I won't lose you, Commissioner Ryan, because I know you want to sort of wrap this up. Council Palmero, we're at time, but I want to give you a moment just to share your thoughts.
There we go. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the presentation, you guys. Just a quick question. Did I hear you right that the HMIS is the only data tracking system that we'll use, and will we be training people to use this again or retraining anyone, or any thoughts on that?
Jump in on that.
Yeah.
So the HMIS
ahead,
is the primary data system into which all of the data for participants of our community's homeless service system are stored. It makes a good deal of sense to continue using that because we're already required to use it. Our community is already fully bought into that system. And so to incorporate a separate system would not be aligned with our aims towards system efficiency and integration. So I believe we plan to keep using that system and then to figure out how to plug sort of modular tools into the data that we then pull out of that system subsequently.
All right, Commissioner Ryan, the last word is yours.
Yeah, well, I just want to say how great it is that we're at this conversation. And I also want to just say the time is now. And so we don't meet very frequently, and I would hate to let this wait until our next meeting to move the contract along with Community Solutions. So this is me, kind of a newish person at the table, doing all I can to make a motion, if you will, that we move forward to work with Community Solutions so that we can get what the houselessness residents deserve, what the providers deserve, and what voters deserve, which is some really improved data sets so we can know where we are and where we're going. So that's kind of that's my motion. Are we all in?
Second.
Second.
Yeah, sounds great.
All right, why don't we go? I got a motion and a second, and I'm just going to let folks quickly put it in the chat if you're voting yes, if you're voting no, or abstaining. All right, I see where this is going. This is great. Jake, thank you for taking the time to be here. Steve and Katie, thank you. I'm sorry we didn't have more time, but I'm excited about the work that our office can do with Jake and the Community Solutions team. There's a lot of really good work happening in our community, has been for a long time. And the Metro Measure gives us an opportunity to do more and make some really strategic investments, and it'll be good to have Community Solutions along as part of that. So we'll continue to explore what that relationship looks like, and we'll be able to come back to this group with an update on that as we meet again. I do want to, for those in the public who are watching, please do go to homeforeveryone.net to look at the RFP for alternative shelter that is out. Proposals are due by March 9th. There's an upcoming information session on the 26th of February. So please do take a look at that. I believe our next meeting, Paul, is in April. Is that correct?
I believe April 19th.
April 19th. All right. If that is it, thank you all for bearing with us for a few extra minutes. Very much appreciate the meeting today and all of your time and thoughts. thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you all. Have a good night.